Woke up at dawn with the pelicans in flight. Coffee brewing strong by dawn's early light. Waves whisper secrets to my open heart. The life around this water gets me off to a great start. Parrots wild, squawking loud in the old palm tree. Dolphin smiles, brighter than the Texas sun on me. We chase simple dreams, nothing fancy or grand, just honest days in this promised land. God gives rainbow horizons to those in this happy lane. Diamonds dancing on the waves, back sparkling again. Honest living, a pursuit of peace, family ties and the happiness we seek. Love, forgotten country running deep in our veins. Through the storms and the trials we break those chains. Good living brings the blessings we see. The rainbow horizons calling to me. Living each moment, giving truth from the heart. No deceptions woven, no false starts. It goes like a front porch swaying in the ocean breeze. Watching the sunset fade away with pink and blue ease. Teach the young ones right from wrong with care. Hold them close when the world's unfair. In this Gulf Coast life we find our way, building memories that never stray. Oh, rainbow horizons after the rain. Diamonds dancing on the waves back again. Honest living in pursuit of peace. Family ties and the happiness we seek. Love, forgotten country running deep in our veins. Through the storms and the trials we break those chains. Good living brings the blessings we see. Rainbow horizons calling to me. When the night falls quiet and stars shine bright, I thank the Lord for this humble light, for the flag that waves and the grace from above, filling our hearts with endless love. No riches compared to the peace we found in the tides we ride and the love all around. No rainbow horizons after the rain. Diamonds dancing on the waves back again. Honest living in pursuit of peace. Family ties and the happiness we seek. Love, forgotten country running deep in our veins. Through the storms and the trials we break those chains. Good living brings the blessings we see. Rainbow horizons forever free. Yeah. Your rainbow horizons calling me.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate that. So this is way off my normal YouTube experience. And I am, in fact, here behind this beautiful rainbow horizon picture, but I figured you guys would prefer to look at this while I talk about PTSD. And yeah, I don't normally talk about it, right? I kind of stay away from my like real life stuff on my YouTube channel, but I have been requested to make this video, and so I am. So good afternoon to everyone. I hope you are doing well. I'm going to be talking about two conditions really closely related, and they are quite distinctly trauma-related disorders. That would be post-traumatic stress disorder that everybody calls PTSD, and then complex post-traumatic stress disorder, that is CPTSD. Both of these conditions, there are millions of people diagnosed worldwide. There are even more that are suffering the effects of one or the other, and they may not really know that it actually has a name, which is too bad because there is help. The trauma disorders stem from experiences that really just destroy our sense of safety and threaten normality. So I guess the first thing that I'll do is define them, and then I'm going to talk a little about some examples of each one and what it looks like as someone is trying to live their day-to-day life. And finally, we'll compare and contrast the similarities and the differences, including some discriminating features between the two. And then we will kind of end by discussing like evidence-based treatments. There'll be a little bit of talk about maybe some crimes, famous crime that you've heard of, because my channel is, after all, really primarily true crime related. But there are some perpetrators experiencing symptoms of either PTSD or CPTSD that, maybe ran into some criminal activity. And, it's always healthy to know if your symptoms are reaching that level and get some help. We'll end up with providing resources for mental health support because both of these conditions are treatable. Trauma does not discriminate, but if you understand the disorders, how they develop, then we reduce stigma, societal level stigma, and that opens up avenues then for getting treatment, feeling free to fully embrace the various treatments that are suggested, and also to foster empathy among those people that, you may run across in your daily life. So again, I can't stress this enough. If you see yourself within either of these symptom profiles, please reach out to a mental health professional. Psychologists are trained to look at the total scope, and that is your behavior, your biology, and your brain chemistry. So the definition, we'll start by defining PTSD. PTSD is just a mental health condition that will develop after experiencing or witnessing a terrifying event involving actual death or an imagined or threatened death, serious injury, and definitely sexual violence. Many women that are faced with RAPE, they will later develop PTSD symptoms and not really see the connection. Not everyone faced with imminent or threatened death will develop PTSD, but we do know that the earlier the debriefing after the event, the less likely you will go on to develop some of these symptoms. According to the diagnostic criteria, the DSM-5, PTSD involves symptoms that persist for at least 1 month, and their distress that they cause is significant, that you see effects and impairment in your daily life. It's almost like the mind has like an alarm system in it, and it gets stuck to on. And so you have this shock where you're confronted with what is someone's actual death or serious injury, or you believe that death may occur, and then your alert system goes on so that you can react properly in an emergency situation, and you just can't get it to turn off. So even a month later, you're just feeling agitated, unable to sleep, pacing the floors, memory of the event replays over and over in your mind. complex PTSD, while it is a trauma-related disorder, so it's different, right? So medically, it's recognized in the ICD-11 as a separate disorder, but in the DSM-5, we don't yet really have that designation for CPTSD. It arises from prolonged, repeated trauma. Prolonged, repeated trauma. It is often impersonal and inescapable. The person that is being traumatized and re-traumatized, they feel like they are completely powerless. That they are being targeted. It is a direct threat against them, and it's something that they have no control to stop. Generally, people that suffered systematic abuse in childhood, that is when we see this kind of diagnosis. This is a big diagnosis. It does include the core PTSD symptoms. However, you also get the added layers of 3 really, really important layers of awareness, and that is emotional dysregulation, negative self-concept, and interpersonal difficulties. These 3 things on top of the core PTSD symptoms makes it nearly impossible to survive in the world, the day-to-day world. And many people suffering from CPTSD, they become quite robotic in their day-to-day actions. So if you think of trauma that is a series of scars rather than one single wound, that is complex PTSD. We'll generally see a pattern where you have someone who was traumatized in childhood, generally an abuse situation, usually terrible things happening with the caregivers. I've even seen it where a sibling was particularly brutal, and then that gets repeated over time and then into adulthood. And then once you're in adulthood, other traumas happen, but it always goes back to the foundation of the early abuse before adulthood. This type of trauma actually changes your brain. It changes the way that you process information, changes your personality. It reshapes your entire worldview. It changes who you would have been into some variation of that. There's a lot of like high self-monitoring. There's a great deal of vigilance of the environment. Anything can be interpreted as potentially threatening. Whereas with PTSD, remember, PTSD is one single event, one single wound. Very specific places or people or things can become triggers. With complex PTSD, you're just surrounded by triggers. They're everywhere. So if we consider how these 2 disorders develop, then we can look at some events that would have led up to certain types of trauma. So like I said, with PTSD, generally you're looking at a single high impact trauma event. This morning, there was a shooting at a church in Michigan that was horrible because it included fire, and the truck had a bomb in it, and some people got trapped in the church and burned up in the fire. So for those people that were in the church when the truck rammed into the side and then the fire started and shooting, those people will need to see a trauma therapist like today so that they can talk about what their experience was, they can process it. And as you go through that process, you reduce the chances of a condition like PTSD forming from this single high impact, horrible event. Okay, so it's a shock trauma, if you will. So we did see a lot of this with the survivors of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Among all the flooding and all the chaos, people were watching lots of death. There were bodies that were just floating in the streets. They watched their homes get destroyed and blown away. And so later, if they would, let's say, see a photograph of a hurricane, or maybe there's a storm that blows up, that is enough to create a flashback scenario where they relive, they're actually propelled back in time to the moment of trauma, and they can see the water rising and they can smell the smells that were there. And so anytime they see, they may start like watching the news constantly, waiting for the next storm. And even if it's just a little rainstorm, it's really not anything. For them, they're back in Katrina. They're reliving that nightmare. They'll become hyper vigilant to weather and storms, but they also might even do something like avoid water related activities. Like they may start refusing to go swimming in a swimming pool. Again, because that swimming pool, the deep water serves as a flashback to maybe when they were walking down the street up to their waist or chest deep in floodwaters, trying to get to high ground, and they see the bodies of their neighbors floating past them. So it was a horrible, horrible event. Some people died on their rooftops, waiting for help to come. Some people got trapped in their attics. They thought, if I go up in my attic, that's going to be deep enough. And the water just kept coming, and actually trapped them in their own homes. So it was a horrible, horrible one-time event. And even people today continue to struggle. School shootings are the same. Those kids just for decades, they're haunted by what they lived through. Developmentally, though, the symptoms of PTSD can be a bit delayed. Maybe you don't have any of these flashbacks. Maybe the hypervigilance doesn't start until a bit later on. Sometimes it takes people completely by surprise and they don't know why it's happening. But then when you go to a trauma psychologist, they can help kind of walk you back through your history and determine where this trigger was first developed. Once you know that, then you can reprocess it, rename it, form new neural connections, and feel better. So in these terrible events, the intensity of what the person experiencing is overwhelming, and the brain can't process it enough. So as the brain is struggling, it kind of becomes hyper efficient, and you get a single memory retrieval path between some object and the event itself. And that is a trigger. Somehow your brain may connect, let's say, a wet dog to wandering through the chest high water, believing that you were going to die. And so if you see a wet dog, then instantly physically, you can feel the water, you can smell the smells, you can see the bodies of your friends and neighbors. You can feel that sense of hopelessness and abject fear, and you're transported back in time. Okay? Just because there's a wet dog. And I don't know if you know this, but dogs need baths. So it's highly inconvenient for normal expected daily life items to turn into triggers to this single horrific event. The altered brain chemistry, the altered fear responses to these memories, that it happens within the amygdala and the hippocampus. And so the activities that your psychologist will ask you to do will be about relearning and forming different neural connections and basically trying to convince the amygdala that everything is okay. All right. So it's a really long, complicated process. It's very, very difficult to break it down and make it short and sweet. But again, this is not like a how-to therapy video. This is just an overview, the differences between PTSD and CPTSD. And so I want to kind of stick to that. Okay. So then if we look at CPTSD, complex post-traumatic syndrome disorder, it develops from sustained repeated trauma. Generally, the first trauma usually happens in childhood, and the person is basically a stressful trauma occurs, and it draws attention to the fact that the child or the person who feels powerless has realization that they can't do anything about it. To have your sense of control taken from you is absolutely terrifying, especially when you are in a survival situation. So the classic example for CPTSD is childhood sexual abuse by a primary caregiver. I know that is a very specific definition and catalyst, but that is the number one for complicated reasons. That is the one we most often see associated with complex trauma. Childhood sexual abuse by a caregiver, someone that the child depends on for survival. So the idea that you can escape your batterer, we'll call them our monster. The idea that you can escape your monster is not even a reality for them, because the monster is the mom or dad or grandma or whoever the caretaker may be, teacher maybe. Over the years, the betrayal and the helplessness from that core violation of a caregiver being the monster, this leads to not only flashbacks, but a really, really, really deep-seated belief in your own sense of worth. You feel completely and totally worthless and impotent. You feel, as the victim of a caregiver in this core violation, you grow up feeling zero sense of control for your environment. You will not stand up and voice your opinion. Why would anyone care what you say? Many of these people that develop CPTSD just kind of end up living a life of a successive pattern of abusive relationships. They just take it. They don't fight back. They feel like it's their role. They have difficulty trusting others, and they have extreme emotional reactions, which can be quite strange. That a person seems very, very compliant, willing, quiet, and then the next thing you know, they are in just abject total rage. Prisoners of war, or if they were hostages in prolonged captivity, like during the 70s, the Iran hostage crisis, if you experience the ongoing threat, isolation, and abuse, that also can create complex PTSD. So in the case of prisoners of war or people that were hostages for a length of time, they will often manifest deeply related chronic shame, and they will avoid relationships, intimate relationships with others. They don't want to find a mate. They don't care much for like close friendships. They just kind of turn into an army of one and go through their life controlling only themselves. So the complex trauma stems from interpersonal trauma, where being able to escape is looked at as an impossibility, and it disrupts attachment. So relationships become quite difficult, and they fail to develop the skills of self-regulation that all children have to master. But after suffering these types of traumas, these kids just cannot regulate their own emotions and body. And so if there is domestic violence, there's repeated cycles of abuse. The victim not only fears triggers, but then will also identify even normal relationships, friendships, love relationships. They'll look at that as another potential danger, that, oh, if I get involved in this relationship, then this person that I'm going to trust to be in this relationship with, they will also become my monster, and they too will begin to harm me. So the friendship itself can become like a trigger to the violations of the childhood monster, whoever the caregiver was that harmed them. So these examples will show that they show how PTSD, as a reaction to a one big hit, one horrible trauma, compared to CPTSD, is kind of like a death by 1,000 cuts, right? It's just kind of continued and ongoing, and it's unpredictable. You don't know when the next trauma is going to occur. You just live through it. You live with it. And these are powerful experiences that are enough to reshape your core beliefs, change your worldview, to the point that the way you're actually neurologically processing information is modified. So if you compare and contrast these two disorders, you would focus on the discriminating features in order to kind of parse out the overlap in the distinctions of each. Both CPTSD and PTSD involve re-experiencing trauma, flashbacks, nightmares. There is avoidance behaviors, trying to stay away from any reminders. There is hyperarousal, that we generally think of hyperarousal as irritability, jumpiness, very tender, that the slightest little thing can trigger you into an extreme emotional reaction. There are negative mood changes, guilt, chronic guilt, except you don't know why the hell you're feeling guilty. You didn't do anything to feel guilty for, and yet it's a constant companion. It lives with you. You can see how unpleasant this would be for either PTSD or CPTSD. So especially with complex trauma, we see a lot of detachment. Detachment becomes the primary coping tool for many of these people. Will they dissociate? Yes, of course they will. Complete dissociation, so that they have memory loss. They don't know where they are. They don't know who they are. Maybe sometimes, but most of the time, it's just detachment, a lot of emotional numbing, being very robotic as they go through their day, focusing on ideas and things rather than being involved with people. It's easy to see when you look at the detachment and the way people learn to cope with these two disorders. It's easy to see how sometimes you do have to be very, very careful that you don't assume that someone may be, let's say, high functioning autism, when really their detachment, their failure to interact, sometimes that just may be complex PTSD that was extreme, right? The other thing that we'll see sometimes, misdiagnoses, borderline personality disorder, other types of personality disorders. When you really start working, you realize this isn't personality disorder at all. This is 100% survival and coping skills. And those things matter in therapy, because you're going to have a treatment plan that is addressing the core of the problem. So whether it is a personality disorder, whether it is some kind of spectrum disorder, social interaction, or it's a trauma reaction disorder, that will guide goals and objectives and techniques that you would use for treatment. The comorbidities that will go along with these two diagnoses will be depression. There is a high rate of substance abuse among this population. And in general, we do see disruption in regards to their work environment, within intimate relationships, and even with their health. Many of these people become self-destructive. The contrast are PTSD is from short-term trauma, symptoms that cluster into 4 areas, and they are intrusive thoughts, avoidance behaviors, mood and cognitive alterations, and levels of arousal. The discriminating feature between the two is full recovery. There's potential for full recovery with the proper type of therapy. You're going to need to find someone who is well trained in trauma specifically, and as well as brain chemistry and how to use your behavior to alter some of your brain chemistry. So my advice would be, if you feel like you're dealing with the effects of trauma, my advice would be find a psychologist who is been trained in trauma. With CPTSD, there are 3 additional clusters. So to be clear, with CPTSD, you have everything that PTSD has and these 3 unique clusters. All right. That first unique cluster is emotional dysregulation. The high points for emotional dysregulation is intense, unstable emotions like rage. Like, you're not just mad, it's like demonic rage, right? You want to destroy something. And then despair. So it's not just a little melancholic. It's not some depression. You are wiped out. No hope, no ability to think about hope, no way to get your body moving, like you're done. Okay. So intense mood swings that are nearly impossible to manage. The second unique cluster is the negative self-view, and that is an unabiding belief, a deeply held belief that you are shameful and you are worthless. And it is very difficult to knock that out from underneath someone's worldview. It's very, very difficult. The third in these unique clusters are interpersonal problems. People with CPTSD have all the problems of PTSD and the additional problem of struggling in their interpersonal relationships. It is impossible for them to sustain a relationship, whether it's a love relationship or friendship. It's very difficult. And in this strange way, they become quite preoccupied with their monster, with their abuser. Everything goes through the prism of that caregiver that dished out the first horrible string of events. This is easy to see when it's presented this way. It makes it very, very easy to see that complex PTSD is absolutely debilitating. Complex trauma often resembles personality disorders. And there's another reason why you're going to want to go to a psychologist who is trauma informed, because we want to treat the trauma. We don't want to try and treat personality stuff. It is trauma that is the heart of it. And somebody that is knowledgeable and has had the proper experience and guidance while they were getting that experience, they'll be able to parse out and discriminate exactly where all of these kind of similar symptoms, where they originating from. So the trauma sufferer might avoid crowds because they're terrified of, like, maybe they were at a bombing or something like that. Whereas someone with chronic PTSD would absolutely not only avoid a crowd, but they would avoid all intimacy and feel completely inherently unlovable, right? Whereas with PTSD, you would say, okay, I think I don't want to go to the rodeo because of what happened when I was at the school shooting. I don't think I want to do that. I think I'd prefer to stay in and cook spaghetti and play my video game, and then feel safe doing that. But a chronic trauma sufferer would say, okay, we're not going to go to the rodeo, and because I don't feel safe doing that. And then when they get home, they crawl in bed and they cry for 3 hours, remembering when their mom did these horrible things to them, and feeling like they created the trauma and that it's all their fault. Guilt, shame, believing themselves to be unworthy and unlovable, having no sense of personal agency that they can control something to make it better. All right. Family functioning and social support can discriminate. Complex PTSD groups often report more school problems and less support. Complex trauma shows greater psychosocial impairment, just an overall fear of relationships. While PTSD is brutal and it hurts and it disrupts your life, complex trauma is a web of fractures that you basically have to kind of rebuild your foundation. Once you rebuild your foundation, then everything starts to fall in line. We use tools like the International Trauma Questionnaire to kind of figure out what exactly is happening. What is the catalyst for this trauma? Was it complex trauma? Is it simple trauma? I hate to say simple trauma, but is it PTSD emanating from one brutal event, or is this someone who has acclimated to a environment filled with danger and tragedy, and they just don't have the tools and foundation they need to be healthy? Treatment for both disorders is great. It's hopeful. They respond well to evidence-based approaches. Although with complex trauma, we are much, much more organized. There are phases of treatment, and the treatment can really last years. However, the person gets to feeling better relatively quickly. But you can imagine to learn how to reparent yourself, to process the early traumas and find meaning in them, learn effective coping tools rather than detachment and numbing. So it's just a longer process because there's more work. It's a lot of relearning. Activities that really sort of fuse the mind, brain, body connection, such as yoga, dance, whitewater rafting, and things that require a skill as you're actively doing something. All of those are considered first line critical activities that should be happening as therapy is progressing. Trauma-focused psychotherapies would include prolonged exposure, involves gradually confronting the trauma memory in order to reduce fear. So you expose a little bit of the trauma, and then the person uses their coping tools to calm themselves down. The first step of your PTSD treatment should involve the development of coping tools. You should be learning how to use different types of breathing techniques to control your emotional reactions and your physical reactions. For example, if you want to lower your blood pressure, feel more grounded, then you're going to want your long exhale to be twice or 3 times as long as the initial inhale. And it takes a little time to develop these skills for like diaphragmatic breathing, double inhalation. There's all different kinds. So with trauma therapists, first thing they're going to do is they're going to teach you a lot of coping tools. They're going to teach you guided imagery. They're going to teach you skills to use as you go through modified exposure therapy or straight prolonged exposure therapy. Not very many people anymore are doing exposure therapy, which I think is very, very interesting. Behavioral psychologists would be the ones that would be really good at something like exposure therapy, modified exposure therapy. I use a lot of modified exposure therapy with the people that I work with really great results. Some people get frustrated with me because I'm teaching the coping skills first, and they're like, when are we going to talk about the bad stuff? And I'm like, we'll talk about the bad stuff when you have the skills to calm yourself, because when we talk about the bad stuff, it's going to fire up the old emotional reactions to the trauma. You need to have the tools this time you experience it to quiet it and calm it and control it. So we do different types of exposure therapy. Flooding is not something that people just don't do that anymore, and it's not recommended. You actually, if you're a therapist, please do not do flooding, and please read about that so that you don't re-traumatize someone. But the modified exposure, I think, works great. Modified meaning you can use. You can hold on a minute. I got to take a drink. Modified exposure therapy that you can use videos and photographs and things like that to be the trauma trigger instead of actually being in vivo doing the actual trauma event itself. Cognitive processing therapy, CPT, also helps to reframe the event and your role in the event. eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is known as EMDR. That is using bilateral stimulation to reprocess memories, form different neural connections and pathways of retrieval. Medications like SSRIs, sertraline, manage symptoms. Trintellix is an amazing relatively new antidepressant that is, man, if you've tried SSRIs and they've been of no help, you should try Trintellix. It's amazing. And I do not sell it. I make no money from it. I just have seen a lot of people have such great reaction and they haven't done anything else that would help them. We're also using virtual reality exposures. That would be part of a modified exposure contingency. And so, yeah, I love virtual reality in therapy. It's amazing. For complex PTSD, treatments will overlap those that I just talked about. But the CPTSD treatments emphasize safety and self-regulation first. Look, everybody needs effective coping tools. As a psychologist, if there's trauma, I am going to teach you coping tools. I'm going to give you the ability to improve your perception of safety and give you the ability to self-regulate. I'm going to do that first, no matter if this is complex trauma or if this is simple trauma. I'm just going to. Now, the treatment approach would say, oh, well, it's variable with PTSD. I do not think so. I think everybody benefits from healthy coping tools. So I teach that first when there's trauma of any sort. There is also trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. They're adapted in they're adapted in a lot of ways, and I'm running out of time here. Dialectical behavior therapy is so powerful. It's such a great therapy to use with trauma with complex trauma because of the component for emotional regulation. So if you're dealing with this, dialectical behavior therapy, you can get a book and you can get like a workbook and go straight to the chapters that focus on emotion regulation. It's amazing. There's phase-based approaches like those in the ICD-11 guidelines that start with stabilization before you do trauma processing. And you can probably guess from the way that I've talked about this today that I'm in the group of phased treatment approach. Okay, you're going to learn to take care of yourself first. You're going to develop a sense of control first. Then we start processing the trauma. Medications can mirror PTSD, but therapy just often is rebuilding self-esteem and relationships. So both PTSD and CPTSD benefit from support group, but lifestyle changes are also incredibly healthy. The first lifestyle change that I ask of my patients is yoga, dance, something like that. The complex PTSD, these people benefit from the same thing, but their treatment is very complex and long-term, and it should be methodical, should be planned phases. Trauma never excuses crime, but we can look at the perpetrators of crime. We can look at their family structure. We can look at their early life, how they performed in school. People have done this with Charlie Manson. They're going to do it with Kohberger. They should be doing it with Chris Watts for damn sure. Travis Decker's it's pretty simple to see what happened to him, right? So understanding criminals and why and how they grew up and the factors that influence them, it never excuses the crimes they commit. So I want to make that very, very clear. Never is trauma an excuse for crime. But in order to try and prevent or treat the person before trauma happens, before crime has occurred, we have to understand it. And that's why we study people that commit crimes. It can often look speculative to people that are kind of outside the loop of psychology and how these world environments can shape us and form us. But the people that are doing this kind of work, the people that comment on it, they're doing it in hopes that it creates awareness and prevent it from happening in the future. There's a group of people in the true crime community or around on the periphery of the true crime community that have developed this hard line that no speculation should occur. And I just don't think that I don't think that is really accurate. I think for people that have the background, the training, and the interest, I think it can be really helpful. It can be helpful to recognize your own part in things. It can help you recognize someone that you may know that's associated. The guy that shot Charlie Kirk, his dad recognized things about his son. And then the grandpa's gun was missing. And, unfortunately, they put two and two together and realized their child was, in a nightmare, and he was the nightmare giver. So, I do speculate. I do talk about factors for these people that commit crimes, the factors in their life that may have led to acting out a terrific crime. So we don't, there may be speculation. You talk about reported histories and relationships and events in a criminal's life. You're not diagnosing these people. You're really just sort of doing an exploration of what could have happened, possibly what potential diagnoses might be. Diagnosis is a very specific process that would include a conversation with the person that you are diagnosing. So to just read news stories and watch and, see what people are saying, you're not diagnosing someone. You're speculating, and you are doing kind of a breakdown of what may have been going wrong. Some mass shooters with military backgrounds, it seem to have demonstrated symptoms of PTSD. Robert Bales is a U.S. soldier who killed 16 Afghan civilians in 2012. He had multiple deployments, and he had reported PTSD symptoms for quite a while. He had combat trauma. There was also Nidal Hassan in 2009. He was in Fort Hood. He's the Fort Hood shooter. And his symptoms of war-related stress were well known among his friends and family, though in his situation, he had not been formally diagnosed. Robert Bales was diagnosed. Travis Decker was, in fact, diagnosed. The judge was so far off base with Travis Decker. He should have been hospitalized for his own safety as well as the safety of the community. But the judge missed it, unfortunately. CPTSD, many serial killers demonstrate signs of complex childhood trauma. Eileen Huernos she killed 7 men in like a single year's time. Her childhood was unbelievable, unrelenting abuse and neglect, severe abuse, not only by her caregivers, but people in the community. And so she had a very warped sense of self and her worldview. She also demonstrated extremes in her emotional regulation. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, that is a very scary and kind of freaky dude. 13 murders between 1984 and 1985. He suffered head injuries as a child, in addition to witnessing extreme violence in childhood. And so, you know, these are just two limited examples where there's enough diagnostic criteria known about these two people that you could expect that they would have had the diagnosis of complex PTSD. If you are struggling with trauma, symptoms of depression, personality disorder, help is available. In the United States, the crisis line, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week support. Also, there is the National Alliance on Mental Illness Helpline, and that number is 1-800-950-NAMI, N-A-M-I, and that translates to the numbers 6264. If you are a veteran, you can call the Veterans Crisis Line. It is 988, and then press 1. Or you can text the word in capital letters HOME to the following number, 741-741. Also, you can call a hotline that is 1-800-662-HELP, H-E-L-P. That translates to the numbers 4357. So in closing, PTSD and complex PTSD remind all of us that, you know, trauma has some profound, incredible impact. However, recovery is not only a possibility, but if you find the right, psychologist and you change your lifestyle in a very specific way, you can begin to overcome the effects of that trauma. So this was very, very different than what I usually talk about or do on this channel. And I hope that for a few of you at least, it was interesting to listen to. And I'm out of time, so I'm going to have to end this. I hope you guys have a great day. And yeah, again, this was different for me. So I'll say goodbye, and you guys are awesome. And like the little sign says, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the little bell. Okay. All right. Thank y'all for being here.
Woke up at dawn with the pelicans in flight. Coffee brewing strong by dawn's early light. Waves whisper secrets to my open heart. The life around this water gets me off to a great start. Parrots wild, squawking loud in the old palm tree. Dolphin smiles, brighter than the Texas sun on me. We chase simple dreams, nothing fancy or grand, just honest days in this promised land. God gives rainbow horizons to those in this happy lane. Diamonds dancing on the waves, back sparkling again. Honest living, a pursuit of peace, family ties and the happiness we seek. Love, forgotten country running deep in our veins. Through the storms and the trials we break those chains. Good living brings the blessings we see. visions woven, no false starts. It goes like a front porch swaying in the ocean breeze, watching the sunset fade away with pink and bluey. Teach the young ones right from wrong with care. Hold them close when the world's unfair. In this Gulf Coast life, we find our way, building memories that never stray. Oh, rainbow horizons after the rain, diamonds dancing on the waves back again. Honest living in pursuit of peace, family ties and the happiness we see. Love for God and country running deep in our veins. Through the storms and the trials, we break those chains. Good living brings the blessings we see. Rainbow horizons calling to me. When the night falls quiet and stars shine bright, I thank the Lord for this humble light, for the flag that waves and the grace from above, filling our hearts with endless love. No riches compare to the peace we found in the tide